Go ahead and get started. Thank you, Stephanie, for starting the recording. So good morning. Today is Friday, September 9th. This is our Governance and Coordination Action Team meeting, and we will have a really full agenda as always. So go ahead, Nick. Next slide, please. Great. So we have a good agenda. We'll spend some time giving background about how this flood task force started, and give a little bit of information about how we have the public participate. We'll also update our action plans. We have, again, we're getting towards the end and working towards our final report. And so we're going through the action plans and making sure that they are all correct from all the committee work that we've done to date. So we'll also have an update on our sensors. And we'll talk about the selected action plans. We'll do some funding survey results that you may have received already. Hopefully you've participated. If you have not, maybe you'll have a chance to participate with the conversation today. And then we'll also talk about the FY23 budget status and start to really think about what we're going to be doing in FY24 as a budget request. And then we'll close out the meeting with next steps and a little wrap up. Next slide, please. So just to give a little bit of background on how this task force started, it was established by the city administrator in September of 2021. And we report to the Deputy Mayor of Operations and Infrastructure, that's Lucinda Babers. Also, the co-chairs of this particular task force are the CEO, Mr. David Gaddis from DC Water, and the Director of DOEE, Mr. Tommy Wells. We kicked off the meeting in November of 2021, and we make sure that all the proceedings, all the information and resources is available to the public. We also have had public input and feedback all along the way. This information is housed on our website. It's dcfloodtaskforce.org. That's dcfloodtaskforce.org. And all the information for upcoming meetings, all the information for minutes, and any other resources we've referenced are posted on that website. Next slide, please. So we have a schedule that's pretty frequent. The full task force meets every other month on the third Wednesday. We will have a full task force meeting on Wednesday, September 21st. Then we have action team meetings. Our action teams are in two groups. We have the residential resilience, which happens every month on the second Tuesday. And we also have, excuse me, the governance and coordination meeting every month on the second Friday, which is today. The flood task force final report that we're all working towards right now has 9 categories for the action plan that we're creating. We also will have a final report that's completed by all the task force members. And once it's completed, we will meet annually to track the progress of the action plan that has been submitted or will be submitted. We'll continue to discuss the budget for all action plan priorities as well. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, we have 2 action teams with 9 categories. Residential resilience covers categories 1 through 4. Governance and coordination, this action team covers categories 5 through 9. And then we will have our next meeting for residential resilience next week on Tuesday, September 13th, starting at 2:30. Next slide, please. So to get started with the updates on the action plan, we have, I believe we have Nick and Salim. Please, Nick.
Thanks, Monty.
Thank you.
All right, so if you go to the next slide, so we're kind of in the home stretch here of the task force. Basically, we're thinking about the last 3 meetings of the task force and what we have to do. And basically the way we've done it is we divided all of these action plans that we're doing, and I think we're up to about 30 now. And they're going to be approved in different batches. So the September 21st meeting actually we'll be hearing about plans in each of these batches, but I think looking at the final approval dates is a good way to kind of describe where each batch is in the process. And so we'll talk about which action plans are in which batches, but essentially coming up this September, the task force will give final approval for batch 1, and then for batch 2 it'll be November, and then the last batch in January. And then we did get recently a letter from the city administrator asking to extend, or telling us that the task force is extended. We can have a last meeting in January 18th and then submit a report in February. So I will send that letter out in the next couple of days so that everybody has a copy. So if you go to the next slide, so here's what batch 1 is, and I've highlighted in blue the action plans that are coming out of this group, the governance and coordination. So these should be pretty familiar because they've been through agency public comment for about 30 days, and then they just finished going through public comment for another 30 days. So now, early next week, you guys will see the final versions that incorporate any public comments that we have, and then they'll be voted on the 21st.
Hello.
All right, so if you go to the next slide. So also on September 21st, we will be voting on batch 2, but we're not going to be voting for final approval. What the task force is doing is voting to release for public comment. So these are all the action plans that will be released for public comment, and these should also look familiar because the past 30 days, they have been in the task force members' inbox for review and comment, and we did get a few comments on these. So again, in blue, these are the ones that are coming out of the governance and coordination, and so they'll be kind of a similar to the last full task force, kind of like a procedural. Here's all of the action plans in batch 2. Do you approve for them to be released for public comment? And then, if everything gets approved, then shortly after the 21st, we will put these action plans on the website and send them out to the public for their review for 30 days. So if you go to the next slide. So then batch 3, these are ones that we've been working on over the past couple of days and past couple of months really. And there's a lot of them because we've these have taken a little bit longer for us to figure out what exactly we want to do and how to move forward with them. So there's actually 3 different slides of these. You can stay on this one for a second. But just as a reminder, so these will also be talked about on September 21st. We're not asking the task force to vote on them, but we are just going to present them for the first time because the full task force has not heard about these plans. So, this shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. Maybe I'll highlight. So we've got DISB, Insurance, Securities, and Bankings. They've been talking quite a bit about different flood insurance options, and so they'll be presenting all of those that we've heard together in the action teams, but the task force hasn't really heard. So they'll be presenting that, and actually we have we set aside a little time today, or we set aside a little time today. Sorry, not today. On Tuesday, if you go to the Residential Resilience Action Team meeting, will be some more discussion there. Let's see. DC Water has a couple action plans at the bottom here, a local workforce and making it safer for residents. All of these action plans are actually part of the residential resilience team. So I may have misspoke. We actually haven't heard too much about these in this particular action team. So if you go to the next slide. So these start to be the action plans that are coming out of the governance and coordination group here. So list of potential funding sources for flood projects. DC Water is kind of taking the lead on that. Process improvements, that's a joint DCRA and DOE action plan. Federal and district collaboration, DOE is going to lead that action plan, but we've had conversations with our colleagues at NCPC to help with that. Mapping interior flooding areas, also a DOE thing. And then the last two, improving process for drainage complaints. I think DOE and DC Water are going to write that action plan, but that clearly 8.2 has many other agencies involved, DDOT and DCRA, certainly among them. And then P Street levee closure. I know we spent a little bit of time, I think last month, talking about this, but DOE will put together an action plan that kind of details the next steps that we need to do for that.
Nick, the 7.1, is that referring to the mapping that you're doing now?
Yeah, so it's this is kind of a new-ish action plan, and basically it will reference, the fact that we have the interior flood model, but it's also going to propose a couple of short-term solutions. Like, for example, I think we can, drawing on some historical flooding data, I think we can kind of circle some areas on a map where we know have interior flood areas, and then maybe we can, if we see a project that's in that area, we can at least tell the applicant and say, this is an area that might be at risk of interior flooding. We won't be able to require that they flood proof it, but we can at least try and let people know when we're aware of it.
I just wasn't clear, remembering past discussions, whether or not you had the funding to complete the mapping, or was this action plan also a request for additional funding?
Yeah, I think we're going to roll in, part of this action plan is going to include a request for additional funding for the integrated flood model for, future years, I think probably like FY 25 and 26.
Yes, and just to reiterate and emphasize what Nick said, any mapping that's produced at this point is just based on historical information. It's not based on any new modeling or, any scientific data. It's just to capture in one spot where we've seen it flood before. So we have something to use for screening projects over the next couple of years until
So this is not related to your current modeling effort. You have a modeling effort
It's a
underway,
quick,
correct?
right, correct. It's a quick interim something to use. It's a quick interim map to use.
Okay.
Yeah, so Sal, like one of our core projects is the integrated flood model, but that one, it's under contract. We're working on it right now. It didn't seem like we needed to have a separate action plan to do that, other than asking for some additional funds at the end.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah. I think we're gonna try and do it in 7.1. All right, so if we go to the next slide. And these are the last three in batch 3. And these are all HCMA led action plans. So centralized place for reporting flood problems, early severe weather warning system, and emergency flood response procedures. So just as a reminder, those last 3 slides that I went through, the intention is that we'll have, a quick, less than 5 minutes presentation on each of those at the September 21st full task force meeting.
Hey, Nick.
Yes.
8.5, that one, I'm not sure it will be for September. I know 9.1 and 9.2 definitely, unless there's some, I'm not aware that we will have that.
Well, so some of these, so we're kind of running up on the time constraint of the task force. And I think certainly I can acknowledge that some of these action plans aren't going to be as concrete as other action plans. So what I think we need to do, because in order to like have this go out for agency comment and public comment and then final approval on the 18th, we need to present them. We need to present any action plan that we want to put in the final report needs to be presented on September 21st. But I'm not saying you need to have solved the problem of centralized reporting, but that action plan should kind of lay out the next steps and the things you're thinking about and the partners you're working with, as kind of as much detail as you can include, so that when the final report is published, there can be some accountability for the task force and the agencies that we said this is a problem, we need a centralized reporting thing, and we're working on it, and here's how you know that we're working on it.
So Nick, we need to have a discussion on that, because I'm
Okay.
not, we see what is aligned with that centralized reporting issue.
Oh, okay. So maybe it's a
Yeah.
So, okay. So yeah, if it's a question of whether or not we even want to do this, then
Lot more
that's a
discussion.
discussion. Yeah.
Nick, there was a question in the chat that from Julia Coaster, and she just wrote, is the interior flooding map using 100, 500-year standards or another matrix? Hope that makes sense. And it does make sense, by the way, Julia.
Yeah. Well, so this like interim mapping that we're talking about, it's the really short term. Basically, we're looking at data points of people who have called in about flooding in the past, 5 years, and that'll just be kind of like agnostic of what, is it a 100-year rain event, is it a 500-year rain event? It doesn't matter. It's like, have you been flooded in the past couple of years? This is a general area we should be worried about. For the integrated flood model, we have the ability to map it in different ways. I think our initial intent is to have a map of the city showing what the 1% annual chance of being flooded is, no matter what the type of flood. So I would say like 100-year, but we also will have the capability to change the settings, run the model again, and show where does it flood if there's a 15-year rain event. So that's something that we have ability to change so that we can kind of see the sensitivity. So it's so we can do it a lot of different ways. I think for now we're certainly looking at trying to do the 100-year for everything, but it's pretty easily for us to adjust it and make new maps if we need to.
Nick, to Julie's point, I'm sorry, Julie, didn't mean to speak.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks. So you're doing one map that's kind of like the Silver Jackets map, which is where are people experiencing it? So we get that tracked. But then
Yeah.
you're also, with the more formal model, gonna run it at least at a kind of like the 1% and see where that takes us. That's cool. Thank you.
Yeah. You got it.
Yeah, and we actually have many, many different scenarios outlined. So we should be getting like 10 maps of different scenarios.
So much data. So fun.
So much data, yes.
So Leo, did you want to add something?
Yeah, the 100 and 500-year flood, that's topographically driven. So that can be shown on the map unless FEMA changes those elevations.
Yeah, no, but I think the question was when you also start to include, so this gets a little in the weeds, but for example, the 100-year rain event means a certain amount of inches of rain that are going to fall. And then what that translates to on the ground, like the 100-year floodplain that results from that rain event, they're kind of like different questions.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think what I'm trying to convey is that I think DOE is interested in creating a map that just conveys like, here's the 1% annual chance risk. No matter where, like, no matter if it's coming from the river or coming from the rain, like, this is kind of like equalized risk across all those different inputs. But we have lots of flexibility, and like, once the model is created, we'll, like Meredith said, we have 10 scenarios that we definitely know we want to map, and then based on those, if we feel like there's others that might be useful, we can
Yeah,
map those too.
sure. That could be a 1-2 punch,
Yeah,
You get inland flooding on a home with 100-year rainfall, and there's a time lag before you see the river come up. Then you get a second if you're already within that 100-year floodplain.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so just to close out this slide, so I'm just going to highlight 8.5, I guess, for myself, that it seems to be a question of whether we want to do this action plan at all, and maybe this gets combined with, there's a drainage committee improvements action plan. So I was just making the action team aware that this might not be presented, it might be combined, but it sounds like between Salil and Vermisi at HCMA, we can figure out how we want to do this one.
I think we should keep it. I just think we need to change the title.
Okay.
We do need to find and communicate to the residents how to report flooding. It may just not be centralized.
Okay. That's fair enough. We can change that.
Vermisi, I'd be happy to work with you on that.
Yeah, this is a follow-up to the, sorry. This is a follow-up to the conversation with Wes, related to, yeah, totally. We need to connect on that, and then we agree about the centralized location. I think it was, I can't remember, it was Disby, but stating like we need to meet the resident where they're at and us internally coordinate. And I think as Nick had shared about the mapping what is being experienced will be helpful to us as we continue forward.
All right. So I'm counting on you two to figure out what is being presented, and let me
Yeah,
know.
we have a back channel right now.
Okay.
No problem.
Awesome.
Great, great. Well, Nick, is that good for you?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and thanks everybody for participating in the conversation. Great questions and some contribution there.
Can
So
I
we're
just
going to
ask one more question? If any other agencies wanted to give any updates on the things that they were working on, just to make sure we have the opportunity before that gets presented.
And I apologize, team. I have joined late. If there are any questions related to the action plan 9.2, the emergency flood response procedures, I've just joined and am able to update or provide any information on that response.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, we haven't gotten any questions yet on those, but maybe do you want to, Nick, Paul, do you want to flip back one slide? These are the HCMA ones, and then yeah, so these are the other ones that you can stay on slide 2 or 3 because 1 of 3 is all residential resilience.
Oh, hey, Nick, I just want to follow up. So on 5.2, when we've talked about funding sources, I think based on our recent discussion with Director Wells, we thought that was going to be, it was not going to be an action plan. It was going to be a summary. It was going to be like a white paper essentially within the action plan.
Yes, I
Document.
hadn't actually thought about whether it would be an action plan or not, but Meredith, do you want to kind of summarize what we're planning to do with kind of like this funding conversation?
Yeah, so we've had several presentations over the course of a number of our meetings on potential funding sources. First from Pew on research they've done. Barbara Mitchell from DC Water pulled that information together to present various potential options. I think there's going to be more on that later in the meeting. And Nick and I discussed this with Director Wells, and his approach is that the the members, the work, the staff working on the task force efforts and the action plans, it's not our responsibility to figure out how to fund this. That's the leadership of the agencies and the task force and the city administrator's office. And so our responsibility, we think, is to provide them information. So based on all of this good research and information that we've gathered on potential funding sources, you know, we're not going to outline how we put these funding sources into place, but we will present what these different funding sources can be, pros and cons, and other information associated with them. So that'll be part of the action plan document. All of these action plans are going to be put together into a consolidated document, and the funding will be a section of that action plan document. Does that cover it, Nick?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so if I had to do these slides again, I would I guess take off. I'd put an asterisk on this, which is, you know, this won't be published as an action plan, but I think we'll certainly share just kind of like a summary with this group of what we've learned about for funding sources, and you know, we'll include that in the report, but it won't be a recommendation of like, you know, do this funding source, apply this tax, or anything like that. It'll just kind of be like a menu and the pros and cons. Okay.
Okay, is that good, Nick? Thank you,
I think
Meredith.
so.
That was a great point to bring up, and we'll have that noted in the minutes so that we can follow up and adjust it for presentations moving forward. Okay, so Nicole, if you don't mind advancing to the next section, please. So the sensors update on selected action plans. We talked about this before in a previous meeting, but we wanted to give some updates there. And so this will be Salil Kakar from DC Water and Vermecia also from HCMA.
So Vermecia, you just want to cover, I know the status hasn't changed much, but what you're doing with the sensors for the underpasses, and then I'll take over from there.
Yeah, sure. So since our last meeting, we were able to present on the action plan in which we laid out some potential equipment options. Just to recap, those equipment options we were looking to explore with this action plan was warning signs. That's the waterproofing LED, enhancing weather alert that indicates to commuters that on the street that there's caller. Hello, sorry, someone there. Okay, I heard someone. Anyway, so that they're at high water conditions, and then the second one is a sensor option, which is installation of remote flood sensors to report water levels. As a group, we have decided that we wanted to establish a smaller working group of, I believe, about 6 agency partners, as well as MPS, to kind of think through some of the locations that have been identified over the last 2 years. That work had kind of started and birthed from DDOT. They had done some flood analysis in 2020 that kind of helped build this action plan up. And through some of the work that DOEE has done with the flood team, they have provided some prioritization locations in Watts Branch and Oxen Run. So we're kind of taking those lists. It's about 30 or so locations. And at our kickoff meeting next week, that Annie Graff, who's also on the call, will be leading with the agency partners. We're going to kind of think through that and prioritize potential locations for putting that level of equipment. And the good thing about this action plan is that we do have some funding to help with doing a proof of concept. As far as that funding amount, we're still trying to determine that, and should we have a better understanding in the next 2 weeks, but it's looking around about $500,000 to assist with this effort. And since some of the locations that have been identified as we know it of the 30 locations, but we need to decide to prioritize, DDOT is mostly in the right of way. So DDOT is would be the ideal implementing agency. And we're working through an established task order that they have to get this going once funding is released through to assist with the proof of concept. So that's kind of the background and more to come to update this team. And I'll pivot to Salil on other things that may be that I may missed.
Ramesh, you missed very little. That was excellent.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
So one of the discussion points, and this may extend beyond the task force also, is part of the integrated flood model that DOE is working on. We have to make a decision on what is the level of service, because in parts of the world where they've actually implemented some of these measures, the roadway itself is used for storage. So is 2 and 3 inches of water on the road justify warnings and sensors, as opposed to something that's going to be a life and death situation like an underpass? So those are some of the decision points we got to make, so we judiciously use our resources for sensors. There's also a issue with too much warning where people will start ignoring it if it's not really something that impacts them. Creeks and streams that typically overflow, like Watts Branch, there's opportunities to put more affordable sensors, which are not necessarily at the USGS. USGS sensors are fantastic because they're a fraction of an inch accuracy, because USGS requires that for measuring flow. But if it's a question of life and depth, plus minus 1 inch makes a big difference of almost $30,000-$40,000 in sensor cost. And that's more than adequate for what we need. So those are some of the decisions that have to be made as we move forward. Do we, for the limited resources that we're going to have, do we put more sensors in locations that can actually provide good data to help people as early warning, as opposed to going for that fraction of an inch definition? So stay tuned.
Yes, and I think that's a good point because we did talk to our neighbors in Montgomery County, and they've given us a lot of lessons learned since they have installed in Salil. I think it's about 20 sensors, and so we want to take those lessons learned and also the ability for they have actually given us access to some of that data. So we want to take that lessons learned to make sure that we're informing this action plan and speaking off of what Salil had shared.
Good point. Thank you, Ramesia. Nick, back to you. Unless there's
Sorry. No, I was just going to say, and if there was anybody from DDOT on the call that wanted to share anything before we move on to the funding survey. Great. Okay, that's fine. Well, Nick, Bernard, we're going to move forward. Nicole, thank you. So we're going to now talk about the funding survey that was sent out to everyone on the action team. Nick?
Yeah, thanks, Monty. So this ties into the little discussion we had previously about that Meredith mentioned, like, we're looking at various funding resources, but we won't have an action plan. We'll just kind of have a report, part of the report that goes to the city administrator. And so like Meredith mentioned, we've heard from Pew, Barbara from DC Water also helped us kind of give an overview of the pros and cons. And what we thought maybe the next step is, the next and kind of last step that I think the task force can help with is we'll send out, we haven't yet, but we'll send out a survey, just like I think it's like 6 questions, 7 questions, to help get a sense of, to get a sense of what funding priority, what the sources of funding, what is most feasible, what are the priorities, what can your agency help with, and include that kind of information in the task force final report. So if you go to the next slide, I've got a couple of screenshots here. So again, I think there's like 7 questions. The first question is, rank these funding priorities. So like, what do we want to fund? And, is it large scale infrastructure project? Is it flood insurance? Is it, public education? So, I think that's pretty straightforward. And then questions 2, 3, and 4 list these different funding sources that we've talked about, and we linked to a presentation. It lists these various funding sources and asks you to think about it from a couple different ways. So question 2 is, what is most achievable? So, if you think about what authorities and a government agency might have, or political will, ability to implement. Question 3 is, what do you think is most efficient for DC residents? I think question 4 is like most ideal. So we're trying to get at it different ways. And then another question is, so these same sources that are listed here, which ones can your agency, or which ones could your agency like help with or be involved in? So maybe just leave it on here for a second. I don't know if, if you look at question 2 and you look at that list of funding sources, I just want to make sure that before we send out the survey that these make enough sense to folks. And again, we have more info on all of these in the slides that we've linked to. You can see it in the question above. So you can refresh your memory, but this is kind of the approach that we're taking. Basically just high level, what do we want to fund, and then what are, looking at these different options for funding, what makes the most sense, and ask it a couple different ways. So that'll be coming soon. We'll send it out to the full task force, and then, like I mentioned, we'll use the results. I guess maybe we can talk briefly about the results in a future action team meeting, but I think mostly we'll kind of just want to include the summary of it in the task force final report. So that's kind of where we're headed on that. Any questions on the funding? All right. Yes, I think there's a lot of emails I need to send to the task force, so this will either come today or maybe Monday.
Nick, I also wanted to just mention in our discussions before that the participation level of all of the action team members is really important, because we're trying to, again, wind down and prioritize the funding resources that are available based on grant opportunities or any other kind of funding that might be from federal funding, as well as budget priority for the district's funds. So going through these questions and having feedback now will be helpful, so that we can make sure that this survey is really speaking to the needs of each agency's way in which they approach prioritizing something that has to do with this flood resiliency plan that we're trying to make sure that we are all coordinated with. So the importance of this, and any input or feedback right now would be helpful, so that we can get good survey results to make sure that we are speaking to the needs of every agency involved as we coordinate as one body, as a flood task force.
Yeah, thanks, Monty. And actually, it also kind of reminds me, like, yes, we're asking about different funding sources, but I think, for me, there's an assumption that if there is federal funding available, we are absolutely going to try and get that first. But I don't think we should expect that all of our needs will be covered by federal funding, and in some cases, like, what we need to do that isn't a good match for the federal funding that's out there. So, yeah, I did want to make the point that this is not, we're going to get as much federal funding as we possibly can, but this is kind of thinking about supplementing it.
One question, Nick, is, right, we can apply for federal funds, but everything else on this list takes some legislative action. So as part of the question, what do we want to ask for?
Ask for in terms of
Right,
what we're
because
applying for.
yeah, like I
or-
can't alone at HCMA say that the district should do tax increment financing. Maybe other agencies have more authority, but like what in some ways this is what are we like what is the ideal way of funding this is one question. What I don't I'm just trying to think of how I would answer the question.
Yeah, I think, well, so maybe just a reminder, like our role in the task force is, in terms of funding and projects, it's two things. Number one is to generate the list of everything that needs to be done to make our city more flood resilient, right? So there's the list of projects. And the second thing is to offer, offer some like initial ideas and research on what other funding sources are out there. We don't need to like match projects to funding sources. We don't need to suggest a path forward for like doing tax increment financing. We just are saying like, here's our list, and it's and the relative price tag, and then kind of separately, it's like we know that we might need some extra. So let me see if I. So this question is what is most achievable, right? So like you might look at this question and say like, I think it's going to be a really tough sell to add an additional stormwater infrastructure fee. So I'm gonna rate that the last. I think I think bonds are more achievable and like what we have authority to do. So that's how you answer this question. There's another question that's kind of like, what would be ideal? So and if you're answering it from the ideal scenario, you might say, I know taxes aren't that feasible, but the idea of an environmental degradation tax where the people who are causing the problem should be taxed, and that's kind of like a more efficient and more satisfactory way to like get something funded. So then that might be your top priority for question 3. And then question 4, I think, is like, your agency. So Melissa, you, HCMA, which one of any are you like most able to help with? And for you, it'd be like the philanthropy and grants would be, I think, one of them, and then there might be others. But does that make
And
sense?
I'll
We're trying
add-
to like,
Yeah, I'll add, this is not an official recommendation. I would say this is everyone's professional opinion based on your work in the district, with the district government, working on these projects, your past experience. We're going to collect this data together, and it can be part of what informs decision makers, but there's going to be a lot more analysis, a lot more work going into the decisions before any path is chosen. So we're just trying to get a read from the
It's
group.
helpful.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. And it's good that there are the other questions. I sort of wish that there was a way, and I understand that this is probably beyond the survey tool, but to sort of like rank, like, because there's a big difference between my ability to get a grant and everything else. Like it's not just 1, 2, 3. Like the gap between 1 and 2 is very large.
Yeah. I wonder, I think Lily's on the call. She's been helping us get this survey. I don't know if there's a way to, like, if you just rank, can you just say, grants is 1 and then the rest is like unranked? Can you leave it like that, or do you have to?
I haven't tried that, but
Yeah, we can look at it.
yeah, we can look into it.
Good comment, though.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're not asking for your names or emails or anything. But we do ask for which agencies, so that when when you answer the question of what can your agency help most with, we know like where you're coming from. But we're not trying to say Melissa said that we should tax everybody.
And we're also not limiting this to one person per agency, right? As many people
Right,
can fill
right.
this out as they want. Yes.
Yeah.
Also, these options that were developed, they will remain there may be a project coming up 3-4 years from now that one of these things could fit. So it's not just today's issues.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I think it was, I'm sure other people were thinking the same thing. All right, so yeah, that'll be coming soon. Please, please share with anyone in your teams that can help answer it. I think, like Meredith said, this doesn't need to come from the director or anything. We're just looking for professional opinions based on your experience and your kind of like understanding of what's going on in DC government. So.
You mentioned that it can be multiple people within the agency. Do you recommend that the task force members forward within their agency to other staff that might be able to, participate in the survey? Or how would you like that to be done?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my thought is, I can imagine a scenario where there's an agency representative on this task force who's maybe not that familiar with funding and funding sources, but they have someone within their agency that is, and then I would forward it to that person.
All right. So for the action team members, you will receive it. You'll bring in the people that you think that can participate as well. And then that will just be forwarded, and then the results will go directly back to Nick Barnard and his team.
Yeah, and then we'll make them available to everyone.
And as you said, it's anonymous in terms of by person, but we do need to know the agency that this is associated with. The results are the survey results are certified. I'm sorry, words aren't coming up. Associated with philanthropy, associated,
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, great. If that's everything, thanks, Nick and Lily. I'm sure you'll be able to figure out this other nuance that will make it even more clear and direct and able to capture that new bit of information. So I have all the belief in you. Okay, so we're going to go forward with the next section. That is Nick Hall, if you don't mind advancing. So the immediate flood proofing for residents.
It's still me. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was about to say, wait a second. I thought it was funding, but it's not. It's flood proofing. So it's still Nick Barnard. Thanks, Nick.
Yes, this is after these two slides, someone else will talk, so you don't have to listen to me the whole time. Okay, so this I think this will be hopefully interesting for people on the call, but we at DOE and DC Water had a conversation with some residents lately who were feeling like they needed some immediate assistance. And when we talked to them, we said, we've got this Flood Smart Homes program coming up that should, that'll be a place where we can definitely help you flood-proof your house and elevate things that need to be elevated, and have professionals come in and survey and look at your home and decide what needs to be done. And so they were excited for that, but they were, their feeling was that is maybe a year away from actually getting these upgrades installed at their house, and that there are residents that, literally the next time it rains are going to have water up against their house. And what can the DC government do to help in these cases? And to be honest, I've been really struggling with how to answer that question. I don't know. So the thought here was that I would bring this to the group. I thought this was a really important, comment that we've received from residents. What can be done now very quickly. And if you go to the next slide, Nick, there's, just have a couple ideas, including one from the resident, which is can DC government facilitate getting sandbags to residents that know that they're at risk of flooding when it rains. So just a few prompting ideas, questions here. And I know we've sort of started talking about sandbags. It turns out it's a very complex issue. to use government funds to, procure and create and deliver. And once they're there, like how do residents know where to put them? So it's pretty complicated. I don't know that that's the right answer, but I'm hoping that number one, this triggers some thought in members of this action team, and then maybe we can brainstorm some solutions here, and then also talk offline afterwards. So Salil, Vermecia, anything you wanted to add?
So Nick, this good introduction. Do you also want to talk about a potential meeting with MWCOG to having a regional utilities share what they do?
Yeah. Why don't you mention that?
So we've talked to MWCOG about touching base with the regional utilities around us. So we get some ideas with what does Arlington do, what does Alexandria do, what does PG County do, what does Montgomery County do, WSSC, and have a small workshop so we get ideas from other folks as to how they respond to this issue. But
and it's not limited. It won't necessarily be limited to like, this immediate. What do you do very quickly, right? Like, I think they have some broader programs like we do about like larger scale infrastructure as well, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah.
But the question right now is, does anybody on this task force have any ideas or have seen things that have worked elsewhere with immediate relief? And how is that managed? My personal recollection is only when hurricanes were forecasted, there was a consolidated effort, I think it was at RFK, to have sandbags and fill sandbags out there. But that was for a forecasted hurricane.
right.
Do not know of anything done for rainstorms.
For these, the temporary flood barriers that we see around that some buildings have procured, or put up. I know I've seen them at the National History Museum and other buildings. Is that something that that can be purchased and just used? I mean, some of them seem easy enough, modular enough, easy enough to just deploy and remove as needed. Does anybody have a sense of the cost of those? Like,
No one
had any. I know Josh is our local expert. I don't think he's on the call though.
It's going to go into hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
And I think the other piece to tackle there though is if you get a bunch of these barriers, how do they, like, I'm just thinking about somebody's front yard. How does it tie into like a building wall or something?
Yeah.
And then also the question is like, what if the ground is not level? Like, what if there's you're going up and down steps? I mean, obviously, like, I'm sure these companies have these types of solutions, and that's the perfect thing that we can do with Flood Smart Homes. Is we can have a professional out there and say like, okay, you need like 5 of these panels plus this certain thing that goes when your step goes up. But if we don't have that professional assessment, that's the part that I'm trying to figure out is like, can we just deliver these panels and people will be able to like kind of figure it out on their own, or are we just creating a sense of security when in fact we're not actually solving their problem?
Yeah.
I think the engineering assessment is very necessary because one size is not going to fit. And when you deliver panels, the next question is always going to come up, where are they going to store it?
Salil, I'd like to just
Thank
chime
you.
in a little bit.
Somebody please do.
When you are talking about even temporary, structures or temporary barriers, you're going to have a lot of back and forth with the communities. You're going to have public space issues. You're going to have private space issues. Someone mentioned the topography of the land, as well as the scale and scope. Looking at certain, hotspots or, the areas you want to protect. Protecting a building is different from protecting an entire area. You start to get into, diminishing returns and how much do you want to move, because these barriers are inexpensive, but they're also not, they're not meant for a mass flooding event. They're meant for, surges or, rain events that come and go. But if we're talking flooding of, Southwest, a larger swatch of real estate, temporary barriers are not a viable solution unless they're in mass, and it becomes a cost, benefit at that point. I'm sorry, a cost negative at that point.
Yeah, these are good thoughts. I mean, it's kind of good to just have this out in the open, that there are, I think people gravitate towards some of these what they think are quick fixes, but they're not necessarily, might necessarily be that quick or work if you do it too quickly.
Yeah.
Nick, there's a couple of things in the chat here. Andrew Wall wrote that there is a flood TTX being hosted by HCEMA that will run the next 2 consecutive Tuesdays, where waterproofing and sandbagging levee installation will be discussed. That's one thing. And then, and Andrew, if you'd like to speak to that, I'm just going to read the next one.
Actually, real quick on Andrew's, is that one specific for like the P Street levee closure, or are you thinking about waterproofing?
It's going to be a full scale, a full scope discussion, I believe. One of the things is that one of the most comprehensive plans that we have is the National Park Services flooding coordination plan. HCEMA also has a 2018 version of a flood response and recovery plan. But one of the challenges that needs to be included is most of this focuses on protecting district agencies and facilities, and it doesn't expand out to residents, that being the distinction. But it should be part of the discussion. One of the things that I would like to also highlight, to Salil's point, I believe, is that it is generally only that type of operation is only known for a known event. And that's generally in relation or association to a hurricane where you have up to 96 hours of advance notification. There has only been one time since I've been on board with HCEMA where we got a notification, and that was through being the program manager for the NCR's watch desk that actually reports on flood events, flood warnings in particular. There's only been one time, and that was the Ellicott City event, where we got any sort of advance notification of a multi-day rain event where it was going to be sustained rain for 2 to 3, 4 days. And it didn't necessarily provide the type of advance notification for flooding that we see systemically over these last couple summers, which are, we get very little notification. Generally, a flood warning is issued. Everybody gets it at the same time, and it hits. Next thing you know, we're dealing with 3 inches of rain in an hour, and we have significant interior flooding that simply can't drain off fast enough, which results in the flooding that we're talking about. So there's kind of the issue. We're focusing on district government agencies and facilities, but there is, like this group is focusing on, residents, but we can only do that if we have advance notification and to be able to set up sufficient logistics supplies, such as a potential sandbagging operation at RFK, where you could have community members come and get sandbags. What I observed in Orlando, Florida, which suffers a lot of tropical storms, is that they set up that type of operation, but community members themselves are responsible for coming and picking up sandbags to provide it, to try to prevent waterproofing at their home. Now that's just the background that I have, and it describes what the TTX is going to be designed to talk about. The first session this upcoming Tuesday is going to actually be talking about post-recovery processes and steps. The next Tuesday is going to be talking about advanced or pre-incident and response operations.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I mean, yeah, and totally agree. Like, it's not feasible for us to try and time sandbag delivery with like a interior flood event. It would have to be some kind of. I like the Orlando example. It's like
One of the challenges that we
Yeah.
saw, that we've actually experienced in the district is that it requires specialized equipment and it requires specialized dirt. It's not just, you know, there's,
I should say.
yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Hey, Andrew, I know I'm signed up for the two-day event next week and the week after. Is there a place is it open to the public, first of all?
No, the TTX is not open to the public. It's for district departments and agencies, as well as our federal and regional stakeholders.
Do we add something to the members on this task force so they're aware of it in case they were not previously?
The action plan 9.2 that we responded for, you know, HCMA developing flood response specific plans. I spoke to that as part of my response. The intention is that the information that we garner out of this coordination session will be incorporated into the updates that we have with all of our flood specific planning efforts. But I don't know the mechanism to extending that to residents and community members. Right now, the focus is the departments and agencies, and specifically the federal coordinating constructs. Nick had talked about the sandbagging operation that's required at a P Street location. That's one of many that the NPS 2019 flooding coordination plan speaks to. But it's going to be talking about the machinations for all of that to occur. Impacts to critical infrastructure for the installation of levees at multiple locations, not only on the National Mall, but also at JBAB and some of the other locations. And then also how we could get sandbagging operations for the other required locations. To Stacy Underwood's point, I do believe that the Silver Jackets, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the National Park Service are the prime. They're our prime drivers of this, or they're going to be our primary participants. And we're going to be taking, as is DC Water, DDOT, DPW, and we're going to be taking a look at what plans are out and available. Are they still relevant? Are they feasible and usable? And what do they communicate?
Thank you.
Awesome. And I think Stacy, yeah, it would be great. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, I mean, Stacy's connected with the larger like national Silver Jackets group, and there might be states out there that have come up with a solution to this. So that would be great if we could find something. Okay. I don't know if we need to spend any more time on this.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, and we had a little bit more time given back by Meredith on her presentation. So this is working out in terms of timing. Andrew, thank you. That was really helpful. And I think, I'm not sure, Salil, were you alluding to the fact that you'd like for Andrew maybe to extend the invitation to that meeting, the TTX, for all of the Flood Task Force agency members? Is that what you were saying, or?
I started saying that, but I think what can happen is once this is over, maybe we can extract critical information from that's useful and then post it on the website.
Okay.
Of course, if it's okay with HCMI and whoever organizes this.
I'm hoping so. That as part of the Homeland Security exercise and evaluation process, there should be an after action report that's developed. They have a fairly robust situation manual that's going to drive a scenario-based discussion with key objectives and outcomes that are pre-identified. Ultimately, the next step after these two meetings are held, we would develop an after action report, and that's something that we can certainly see if we can provide to the flood task force, and then the option to post it on the website.
Yeah, and so whatever you determine, Andrew, once you have the approvals, make sure that, Nick Barnard and Salo Kakar know, so we can have that information. We'll add it to the website as a resource if that's possible. We appreciate it. That would be great to have. And in the chat, Stacy, hopefully you see that you're acknowledged, and we also spoke about it. She was talking about the silver jacket. So thank you for that suggestion. A great added layer in addition to the COG that we're going to check with in terms of regional and other ideas of lessons learned and best practices. So thank you. All right, so we will move forward. Nick Hall, if you don't mind progressing to the next.
Actually, just real quick,
Sure.
my team on the side has been giving me some info on how much it costs to do some of this flood proofing, but it sounds like just a real high level for this kind of like flood proofing that we're talking about. It could be between like $80 per square foot to like $500 per square foot, depending on the or not per square foot, per foot, linear foot, depending on the type of thing you use. So just a ballpark.
And Nick,
Yeah, go ahead.
does it also include labor costs?
Good question.
And that's just the material costs.
Yeah.
I would say
Raw. Okay.
Yeah. Anyways, a ballpark.
yeah.
So we'll have some more information about that. Maybe Nick, if you have more information, we can add it to the minutes from this meeting as an update of information based on the discussion. We'll make sure it looks different because it was not discussed live in the meeting. All right, thank you, Nick and Nick's team behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So we have up next, we have our budget status for FY23, and then we're also going to talk about FY24 budget requests. Again, this task force is really here to make sure that we have coordinated efforts on how we are going to approach flood resiliency here in the district. And this is a part of that process. A big part of it is to making sure that we have funding to do it. So with that, Meredith Upchurch from DOE.
Yes, thank you, Monty. Okay, next slide. I am excited to be talking about budget because this is pulling a lot of this work together. And hopefully now this will make sense as why we have asked for the information and the action plans that we have. Wanted all the budgets laid out so that we can pull all of this together and, show what projects this task force is pushing forward, and also consolidate our requests so that we can say, hey, this is the priority request from the flood task force for funding projects in the district budget and federal budget requests. So I will start with just a summary of what's going to be in the FY23 budget, which will start, the district budget starts on October 1st. So just a few weeks away. I've pulled out just some example projects of what we are continuing to work on from FY22 into FY23, and that is integrated flood model, flood smart homes assessment, Southwest resilience study. Those are all under DOE. DDOT's got Cleveland Park drainage and flood improvements and mitigation, Canal Road culvert, and then DC Water is also working on Blue Plains flood wall segments. We have new projects. Here's a sample of the new projects coming in FY23, several of which have come out of this flood task force. So because we have been working on this for about a year, we were able to get some requests in FY23 budget. So that includes flood smart homes installations, Watts Branch Flood Mitigation Concept Plan is going to start. The flood signs and flood warning sensors that Salil and HCMA were just talking about. We've got a study at Kenilworth Park North. Southwest Blue Green infrastructure design at Landsberg and King Greenleaf Parks in Southwest. So that's just a sample, definitely not all inclusive. But this also shows me that as I'm looking through our infrastructure list, I think we probably still have some projects that we don't have on our infrastructure list. So I think we'll be reaching out to all of our agencies, DC Water, DDOT, DGS, DPR, and others. And I've got some specific questions once we get into FY24 on if there are projects that should be on our infrastructure list that we're including. So next slide, let's talk about FY24. Well, first, any questions on FY23 budget? That's pretty much all done. It's going to roll out and it's going to be there starting October 1st.
Meredith, questions as well as maybe other agencies have examples of some of the things they put in because of this task force work too.
Yep. Any comments from any other agencies or other project examples? Okay, I'm not hearing anything, so why don't, in the interest of time, let's move on to FY24. Okay, so a quick summary on how FY24 budget planning goes in terms of calendar, and also for anybody who's not aware. So district agencies are starting FY24 budget planning now. Generally, we have October and November to develop our budget requests. Both operational budgets and capital budgets, special enhancements. Between around December and February, those budget requests are consolidated into the Office of Budget, and the Office of the Mayor reviews, revises those, sends those budgets, proposed budgets to council. There's council reviews and hearings and revisions, and generally the budget is finalized by around July to August. So next July, August 2023 is when the budget will be finalized. But what this means is we need to be developing our FY24 budget requests very soon and pulling those requests together. And we want to have the task force to be able to support those budget requests. There are also federal grant opportunities that are coming through, and I just want to give a quick plug to the FEMA BRIC program and the hazard mitigation assistance, flood mitigation assistance. HCMA has put out a call for ideas and proposals for that next round of funding, and their requested deadline on that is September 12th. So that is Monday, very soon. Bermesia, do you want to add anything to that?
We're just getting really good ideas, and we're able to start some of those meetings. So appreciate you all continuing to provide feedback and submitting those the agency interest form. If you have any questions regarding the form, it's pretty simple, just about 5 simple overarching questions. Please feel free to connect with us. We may be looking at extending the date a little bit just to provide a little more time. But we appreciate the feedback to date, and appreciate the work from the task force with helping us make sure that we are as coordinated as possible.
Thank you. There are also other federal grant opportunities that are coming through the bipartisan infrastructure law, and then the latest IRA. There is a infrastructure coordination group. I know for many of the agencies, DEMWA is leading a lot of that effort, and there's access to data to see what opportunities are coming out when, and individual agency meetings. So I think we just have to to keep the communication open, stay connected, so that when we see other opportunities come forward, we do take advantage of those. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so just to be clear, all budget requests are the responsibility of each agency. From the task force, we want to be able to show that recommendations coming out of the task force, are consolidated, are supported by the task force, and that support can help raise the priority of any of the budget requests that individual agencies are putting forward. So we're going to use the task force as our raising the importance and the priority of these requests, so that we can get director level support, mayoral level support to have those budget requests approved. And from the task force side, we are trying to pull together and consolidate, what those requests will be. So that's where we need everyone's help. We've already identified some of the continuing projects that we may be asking for additional funding in FY24, and through the action plans, we've identified new projects that will request funding in FY24. That includes backwater valve program and some of the resilience focus areas in targeted neighborhoods. So I've sent some requests out to DC Water to get some clarification on DC Water projects. DDOT will be in contact to see if you have identified your FY24 budget requests, and make sure that our infrastructure list matches what you have. DGS, we do have a line item on our infrastructure list for flood protection in district buildings. So I think we want to be in touch on if there are any projects you've identified from that, or any projects that are in your capital funding that may be in floodplains, to see if there's any necessary flood mitigation work there. And the same with parks and open space. We have a project on our infrastructure list that is called Flood Mitigation in Parks and Open Space. And so I think there'll be a movement towards working towards identifying where those opportunities are.
Yeah. Hey, Meredith, this is Brent at
Brent.
DPR. I would
Yeah.
love to, I would love to work with you, maybe connect and talk about, we're sort of identifying our FY24 list right now. So I'd love to sort of, connect with you and see which ones maybe we could collaborate on, and which ones are, flood prone and that sort of thing. So that would be great.
Okay, fantastic.
Cool. I'll reach out to you offline. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Meredith.
And any from other agencies, any questions or offerings from DDOT, DGS, or any other agencies?
Hey, Meredith, just a question. How stable is the grant funding year to year? Reason being is that looking at, some of the budget requests that could affect performance, oversight, record keeping, things of that nature could be expanded into like an actual position, an actual, FTE or something like that. But our dealings with contractors have been very up and down because of funding stability. So is there any record of the grant funds, or any historical data saying that the anticipated amounts are X and that we could rely on? Because, this could be,
I am not aware of that. There may be others who are more tuned in, but I know for several of the grants that we have seen come in, they are established that they are going to be continuous for 5 years, so that there will be application opportunities. You know, this may be the first year for application opportunities, but there will be 4 additional years of opportunities for applications.
Thank you. That'll help.
Yeah. I think it's going to be specific from fund to fund. Any other questions on budget?
Hi, this is Melvin Smith. Can you hear me from DPW?
Yes, Melvin, yes.
So it's kind of a budget question issue, but more of I guess a task force question issue as well. So there has been a lot of conversation since I've joined DPW about sandbags and who owns sandbags and what that looks like. Is part of the task force designed to maybe come up with a comprehensive plan on how we can deal with flooding issues, mitigating issues, and creating a response plan, if you will, which implements what those triggers are for deploying sandbags, what those triggers are for, what other agency response measures are. So we have general flooding that will come as a result of a storm and increased water levels. And then we have infrastructure issues where, a street may not be level, drainage may not be happening the way that it should. And, homes, businesses become impacted by these things. And so, I guess working with HCEMA to find out what those triggers are for how the city will and should respond. I think DPW is willing to come to the table and sit at the table to come up with solutions and, own what we can, but we couldn't on our own come up with a sandbag plan and support that. We have a number of other critical priorities that we will be responsible for during the disasters, and sandbags probably won't be at the top of that list. But if as a combined conglomerate, we can come up with what that looks like and how to operationalize that, I think that would be really good to focus a portion of our budget, of the budget funding to support those efforts.
Yeah, does HCEMA want to respond to that? That's a lot of good suggestions, and I most of that is in the works from what HCEMA already has for flood emergency response, or is adding to the flood emergency response documentation.
Absolutely. And Melvin, great question. What we have prepared to this task force is in response to action plan item number 9.2. It speaks to establishing procedures and agency roles for emergency flooding response and planning. And so what I'll do, Melvin, is I'll send you a copy of that. And essentially the bottom line up front is we intend to take the information from this committee, the feedback that we get from the next 2 weeks tabletop exercises, and utilize that information to update a flood specific response plan, and then engage with the broader agencies and departments throughout the district in vetting and finalizing or coming to an agreement on a district-wide flood plan. It does not, though, address that is with the current manpower that we have. It doesn't speak to increased budgeting for contract support, which I think was part of your question about, is there portions of this budget that perhaps could be allocated for contract support for the development of a district-wide plan?
Well, no, not necessarily, but at least that, we're not pulling from efforts and resources that are dedicated for other things to now become a part of something that's, flood mitigation is a huge thing within itself. And, trying to manipulate current priorities to also cover flood mitigation, I think, it could potentially, bite me in the back if nobody else. So I wanted to make sure that, we were covering down on what we could as best we could, and so it doesn't necessarily have to be, we are creating funds or a path for paying somebody else, but at least dedicating this as a mission assignment for agencies that's involved. And then I appreciate the offer of sending me what you have, Andy. It's always good to have meetings and conversations with you. So thank you. But in addition to that, I know we talk about maps and modeling, but what type of, and if this has already happened or something that's ongoing, I would love to know more about this. But just using the P Street levee as an example, what type of physical assessments do we do annually to incorporate where we see risk? I know that maps and modeling help us in terms of what's coming, but I'm just concerned that with the development of so many condominiums and apartments and homes, that sometimes we may miss some things. So if that's something that's already captured, I would love to talk with anyone offline about, how that information is managed and monitored in terms of just physical ground layout of where we see potential risk for flooding.
Yeah,
Andrew, I'm just going to say, Andrew and Meredith, before you answer, I just want to acknowledge it is 12 o'clock. Our meeting ends at 12. Melvin, you've asked a lot of great questions. Andrew, you want to give him a quick response so that we can get you guys offline to have a full conversation. And it sounds like he needs to be a part of the tabletop exercise as well. So go ahead, Andrew, please.
Vermecia, were you going to respond about the mitigation or any?
I was going to respond about the mapping.
Okay.
Yeah,
please
just to
go.
say real quickly, Melvin, we'd be happy to fill you in more on what's going on. The mapping doesn't change that much year to year, but it definitely does change once you put a few years together. So FEMA does maps approximately every 10 to 15 years for the coastal mapping. DOEE is working on a project right now called the Integrated Flood Model, which is going to model flooding across the whole city. It's something that's never been done before. So yeah, so we can share more of that with you, but yeah, there's definitely efforts to update our maps. So that's the short answer.
And all of the questions that you've asked, Melvin, are certainly applicable to the next 2 Tuesdays tabletop exercises. When was the last time that they did a boots on the ground assessment at the P Street location, as well as some of the other locations for installation and additional sandbagging? 2019 was the last time that I knew that they did a walkthrough with Corps of Engineers, National Park Service, HCMA, and DPW and DDOT. That I'm speaking for Dante Lucas, so I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it was the last time was pre-COVID, and I'm not sure, but I don't want to speak for the Corps of Engineers to see if they and the National Park Service hasn't done a walkthrough. But we can ask them, is not this an annual requirement? What are the other locations? There's certainly been substantial building. Are any of the modeling that's in the National Park Service's response and recovery playbook, is that still accurate?
Okay, well, thank you, Andrew and Meredith. Melvin, sounds like you've got some new buddies here. So with that, Meredith, do you have more in your presentation that you wanted to discuss? Or is this a good stopping point? Perfect, great. And see, you wanted to just have 15 minutes and you really needed 30. So thanks, Melvin. 20, sure. Okay, so we're gonna move to our closeout, and there's a little bit of homework or some look ahead on what's coming next. Next slide, please. Next, Nick. All right. So Meredith, you want me to cover it, or you want to cover it?
No, usually I'll jump in here. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, Nick, go ahead.
So we can close this out real quick. But so just a reminder, so September 21st, in a little less than 2 weeks, make sure your official agency task force representative is up to speed, ready to vote on batch 1 for final approval and vote on batch 2 for release for public comment. So we don't want them to be surprised. We're doing voting. Number 2, we listed all of the people doing action plans, all the agencies doing action plans for batch 3. So you guys are expected to have a couple slides and actually like speak and present and explain quickly what that action plan is about, because the full task force has not heard. And then lastly, the request here is that, start thinking about your FY24 budget request. Obviously you have to anyways for your agency, but please also focus on the flood ones. And if they're not already on our spreadsheet, please send it to us, me, Meredith, the task force email. Any of those would be good options so that we can help support you as you make your requests up the chain into the budget office. And when I say we, I mean the task force, the royal we. And I think that's mostly it. I'm not even sure we need the next slide. We can wrap up.
Nick Hall, please slip. Thank you. So we just went through all those details. So I think that we're good with this one. We can go to the next slide. All right, and then we've talked about the schedule. We have our residential resilience action team on Tuesday next week, on September 13th from 2:30 to 4. Links will be sent out if you don't already have them. The full task force, very important. All the task force members will be on that, and it's September 21st from 2 to 4 p.m. That will include your directors. Hopefully they'll be available to attend if you're not a director on this call now. And then we'll have our governance coordination action team meeting. The next one will come up on October 14th, and we'll have more work to do as we, again, move towards finishing out these action plans and getting the batches approved. Okay, next slide, please. And that's it. So we are 12:06. Happy Friday, but we'll talk to you all soon. Many of you will see again on Tuesday next week for our call. Thanks everybody for participating and presenting, and we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.